Parshat Toldot. What are we going to do with Parshat Toldot? The first time I read through Parshat Toldot in its entirety, I was struck with a very profound question. Was I reading Torah, or was I reading Game of Thrones? I mean, think about it. Contained in this one parsha are 5 different independent stories built on plot tropes that include divine prophecy about twins, parental favoritism, extortion, famine, bigotry, suspected incest, territorial disputes, conspiracy, deception, manipulation of the disabled, threatened fratricide, virtual disowning over selections of spouse, and people generally being jerks to one another. About the only proof that I can offer up that this was not written by George R.R. Martin is that no one is actually maimed or killed in the end. So challenging was this portion to read to me that I was really only able to find 3 items that rise above the already low set bar. First, we have Rebecca, notable perhaps as the first woman in Torah to pose a question to God and receive an answer. When she inquired about why she was having a difficult pregnancy and was told that she was not only carrying twins, but that the younger would someday rule over the older. Second, Isaac and family escaped famine in the land of Israel by going to Gerar, much like his father and mother did in similar circumstances. They even pretend to be brother and sister for fear of Rebekah being kidnapped and Isaac being killed. However, this is where the story deviates from previous incarnations. And in the end, it is the king, the Philistine king, Abimelech, who seems to be the moral exemplar. When he observes the two engaging in sporting, he questions their morality and chastises them for their ruse. Yet upon finding out that this outsider is the descendant of Abraham, shows no hard feelings by not only giving him his father's old land back, but when Isaac prospers and the rest of the Philistines, the Gerarim, become jealous of his prosperity, goes out to Isaac and negotiates peace between his people and Isaac. Finally, by the end of the parsha, we would be hard-pressed to not have some measure of sympathy for the older brother Esau. He gave up his birthright in exchange for food when he was hungry. His mother and brother conspired to deny him his father's blessing, and his parents virtually disowned him because he married people they did not approve of, even though it appears they never informed him of their preference in the first place. However, each of these potential bright spots is marred by something else. The Midrashic sages couldn't have a woman talk directly to God, especially not before Isaac, let alone at her behest. And so they reasoned that she must have gone to the Beit Midrash in Shem, which is an anachronism if I've ever heard one. King Abimelech and Gerar, who seem to have redeemed themselves from their bad behavior with Abraham and Sarah, well, spoiler alert, in a few months you'll find that they're going to be the victims of a Red Wedding-style massacre. The king, his son, and many of the Gerarim. And the only thing that's said about that massacre, well, Jacob's worried because he has to move now. And if by the end of the reading of this parasha you find Esau to be the least bad of a bad lot, the Haftarah will try very hard to absolve you of that, with the prophet's Micah saying at the outset, in no uncertain terms, Prophet Malachi, saying at the outset, in no uncertain terms, ve'et Esav saneti, va'asim et harav shemama, ve'et nachlato letanot midbar. And I hated Esau, and laid waste to his mountains, and gave his heritage to the jackals of the wilderness. Where do we go from here? Do we accept the text, the commentaries? Do we reject this entire parsha and finding no redeeming quality, move on? Do we hold to our guns, saying that the sages, prophets, or even the other parts of the Torah are misogynistic, nepotistic, and xenophobic with regards to this parsha, and that we know better? Do you think that I just don't get it, that I'm wrong, and that my read is ludicrous, and that I probably shouldn't be allowed to speak about Torah ever again? What is our way of finding ourselves out of this mess that we are in? I want to take a step back from the text now to talk about what I think is going on here, and how all of these millennia-old writings and how we approach them offer a key insight into how to approach events that are very real and very current. The challenges that we see here, I believe, are fundamentally challenges of narrative. Now, when we think of narrative, we may simply think of its precise definition, a spoken or written account of connected events. But the narrative I speak of is so much more. The ideas of narrative theory are relatively recent, and they transcend mere stories on the page. It is not simply the fact that the stories and events connect, but it is how they connect, and the sometimes visceral and deep personal investments to the feelings and connections themselves. These connections can be ephemeral and difficult to define, even for the person holding them. But when we feel that they are challenged, their reactions can be swift, emotional, and sometimes irrational to anyone but themselves. If you've ever applied for a job, you've utilized narrative. The resume, those are just the facts of the story. The cover letter is the context that ties it all together. But if and when you get that interview, you get a chance to present your narrative, to gloss over some of the things that you may have done bad in one job, and to prop up the things that you want to emphasize in another. How does this apply to the text? Think back of Isaac and Gerar. Why did he react the way that he did? Why was he so convinced that he had to lie about his relationship to Rebekah? My guess is that he grew up with stories from his father about how twice a sojourn into a foreign land, including Gerar, had resulted in his mother being kidnapped, and only intervention by God had saved the day. So when Isaac, faced with famine in his homeland, looked to Gerar as the only way that he and his family could survive, he did what he could with the facts as they were presented to him. So I ask you, was Isaac a man who automatically thought ill of people not his own? That they were immoral and motivated by imposing themselves for the sake of their own power? Or were the actions he took to protect his family and ensure their basic survival more than likely born out of a deep-seated love and fear? The best he could have done at the time. Was Isaac a xenophobe? Or did he just take actions that appear xenophobic? This last point may sound nuanced. It may sound purely semantic, but I assure you that it is vitally important. Context may be what separates freedom fighters from terrorists, protesters from rioters, Yom HaAtzmaut from Al-Nakba. But it is communal and individual narrative that informs not only how we arrive at those positions, but what we are willing to rationalize and justify in pursuit of defending those positions and opposing those that challenge it. Building communal narratives and connecting them to individual narratives is a very, very powerful thing. It can be used to build bridges. It can be used to build walls. It can galvanize an oppressed community and their allies to activism and push them forward in the face of overwhelming opposition. Or it can so thoroughly alienate and dehumanize the other to the point that any action taken against them is seen as the height of morality and justice. I think that I can say with a fair degree of certainty that no one here has been untouched on a deep emotional level by the aftermath of this election, if not also the lead up to it. Did you want to make America great again? Were you with her? Did you lose friends and shatter bonds with loved ones because you couldn't believe they would vote for a racist, xenophobic populace that played on people's fears? Or because they supported a crooked, out-of-touch politician that was going to take away your guns and trample on the traditional values that you hold dear? So I ask you again, as I asked you before with the Parsha, how do we get ourselves out of this mess? My honest answer is, I don't know. I'm still processing my emotions to some extent, and I recognize that it is coloring my ability to think rationally and make concrete plans on how to deal with the reality that I now find myself in, as it is for so many other people. But I can tell you the lessons that I have learned, how I have internalized it. This is a little bit of my narrative. So many times during this election, especially on social media, engagements between people who disagreed with us were fraught with aggressive conflict. People didn't just disagree with the validity or veracity of facts. They attacked, sometimes relentlessly, people's right to hold them. They negated the real living experiences that led people to embrace them. By attacking these emotional bonds that held their narratives together, it only furthered narratives of the others attacking them, whether they were out of touch, liberal elites acting arrogantly, or ignorant conservatives who continuously voted against their best interests because of racism or religious fundamentalism. We need to stop this. We need to find ways to engage with those who disagree with us in order to rehumanize ourselves to each other, so that we can interact with some modicum of compassion, empathy, and understanding. There may be things which we still disagree about, and that's okay, because hopefully there will be common ground upon which we can build our respect, to honor each other in our disagreements. I think back to my year in Israel, and a talk given by the author Yossi Klein Halevi, who, when asked what he thought was the main impediment to the peace process, and what he thought needed to be done to break through it, after thinking for a moment, his response was as profound as it was succinct. Jews and Arabs need to be willing to accept that each other's narratives are correct to them. I also think of the principles of nonviolent communication as enumerated in the book of the same name by Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, one of the cores of which are the hearing and validating of feelings and emotions. The quickest way to make someone unwilling to hear your position, especially if it disagrees with them, no matter what truth or facts it is based on, is to say that the emotional and experiential foundation that they have built their facts on is wrong, and that they are stupid for feeling it in the first place. Validating them, on the other hand, does not concede your point, but it makes it more likely that the conversation will continue through respect and finding common ground. Now, I need to make the distinction that what I am not saying is that all narratives are correct, simply that they are correct to the people holding them. No amount of empathy will ever make me expend my time or my energy to seek common ground with the people at the alt-right conference last week, speaking of their belief in white supremacy and white power. No amount of narrative analysis will ever make me believe that the Torah's call for stoning gays or committing genocide against the Canaanite inhabitants of the land of Israel was ever morally or ethically correct. I am not saying that we have a duty to engage in a fool's errand with those who hold dangerous fringe beliefs. What I am saying is that only by seeking to understand people's narratives can we see the difference between blindly placing all those with whom we disagree into that fringe category, or seeing if there is some small way that we can move forward and someday heal and rebuild. We're at a critical time right now. It seems as though walls are building themselves without any intervention. It seems impossible that bridges between people will ever be built. But I hope that you've listened to what I've said and to what I'm going to do in an effort to tear down those walls brick by brick and find a way that we can make this world a better place for all of us. To heal the bonds that we've broken, to find compassion for the people who voted their conscience, and ultimately to reform communities where our individual narratives are no longer pushing against one another, but are coming together to build something great. Sorry, I'm Toby.